You're listening to the Indignants on CHRW. I'm Mike Roy.
Sumbal,
Brent, Cornwall.
And Anthony.
And today we're going to be talking about Stephen Harper's panda visit would be one. What's going on in Greece and some stuff that's going on in Israel right now as well. First thing, though, would be awesome. We could probably pick up on what's going on over there in Europe and in Greece. And Anthony, you were just reading a news story about that that just came out minutes ago. So what's in the headlines right now?
Athens is in flames, and there's rioting and looting across the city. So, the Greek people are responding to the treachery that's being laid out on them, and I think they're an example as usual.
So it's the Greeks that who's setting fire on the buildings?
The citizens, because the government is set to impose new austerity measures in response to the economic crisis, and the Greek people don't feel responsible and largely understand that they're going to pay the price for this, and it really wasn't their crisis.
How many different layers of austerity have they laid down in the last bunch of years? And it seems to be the only word that comes out of Greece is austerity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not even sure how many it's been, but it's definitely been going on for a few years now. They've been so close to defaulting on the previous ones, and it only seems that it's going to end up as a default anyway in the future. Basically, this round of loans that are coming in are going to go for about 40 years, and people just don't want their grandkids to have to take the brunt of paying these loans off when it really wasn't the middle class that had taken advantage of these things. They basically had their GDI really hasn't gone up too much over the past decade or so. Greece in general hasn't improved for the average citizen there, but yet they're facing these huge pay cuts to services, and just because Greece has continued to, take out these big loans over time and not tax the correct people in doing this.
So they've got buildings on fire, eh?
Yes, which seems an appropriate response.
Yeah, I seen the Starbucks on fire this morning. It's been going on for a few days now. Friday, the government was planning on pushing through this last bit, and they basically were shut down because of all the rioting that was happening on the streets. Basically Thursday afternoon, people started taking to the streets, and it's been going on since then, and it seems to be escalating, and who knows what's going to happen in Greece, because this has been going on for a long time. And
it's really unpredictable, which is why it's affecting the markets quite a bit. At least the media portrays that, and it seems pretty accurate because, they're so politically unstable there. They already yanked one guy out of office and put this new guy in because they need this job done that the public just doesn't want done. And you're seeing the result of that.
And this seems to all hark back to when Greece wanted to join the euro. They were already in the EU, but they weren't in. They didn't. Their monetary system wasn't the euro. And I guess from the stories I've heard, good old Goldman Sachs came in and did the books for them, and did a little bit of shell gaming on some of the assets, Greek assets, and got them into the euro when they shouldn't have really even been allowed to. And that's led to all these problems. My big question is, are they going to have a two-tiered euro system, or do you think that Greece should just go back to, controlling their own currency?
Well, I don't even think Greece is going to have that option. I think they're going to be taken out of it soon enough. To get to the point where they were in the Eurozone, it was Goldman Sachs, IMF, a lot of these large banks or banking systems basically lent them money so their GDP and all these other criteria that they needed to meet were in that zone. They took debts in the future to pay off the current ones, thinking that, because I think there's a certain percentage they have to have under debt load to get into the Eurozone. And, they've kind of mortgaged their future to get into it, and it's kind of coming back to pay them. Like, the chickens are coming home to roost, and there's no money to pay off the initial loans that they took before, and Yeah, they've been dazed from defaults a few times now, and I think it's going to be really close again this time.
And I think Greece is about 3% of the whole European economy or something like that. So it's so minute, but if they go down, it looks like it's just going to be a huge chain reaction. Right after that, you're going to have like Spain and Portugal and
Ireland as well. They're going to be
Italy.
out there as well.
Italy, yeah. So, I mean, we've all been watching this now for a couple years. The decks of cards seem to be starting to tumble, but I think we're at a pinnacle moment right now where things are actually going to change very rapidly.
Yeah, it's going to be quite interesting over the next few weeks how things develop there. I don't know how Greece is going to be able to maintain this. I don't think that people want this. And who knows, it could end up in a complete revolution there, or it could be them, I guess, suppressing the people's wishes and getting into the Eurozone, or staying in the Eurozone, or they could just be kicked out straight out from it, because it's just going to be a continuous thing with Greece that if they continue to loan the money and they're days away from defaulting on the previous loans, that it's only going to add up at one point or another, and it's going to cost them.
Mm-hmm.
Something interesting ties into austerity here that's more local. Maybe we can have a little chit-chat about is how I heard the City of London has cut the budget by about $1 million for public housing. Anybody key in on that a little bit better?
Yeah, I can get into that one. The last few years the city has been, actually it's more than the last few years, been putting about $2 million per year into this affordable housing fund. This fund right now, through different layers of government, is over $200 million that the city has access to for affordable housing. So this $1 million that was cut from the budget basically is money that they were putting aside anyway. They weren't planning on using it. But at the same time, there's such a large fund that they're sitting on just collecting interest when there's a huge need for affordable housing in this city is kind of interesting. Apparently, like a non-profit group or something along those lines has to step up and put in the grants to get this money, but at the same time, the city doesn't seem too eager to help these non-profit groups.
So they're sitting on specifically $200 million for public housing.
Yes, Stephen Orser put that on his Facebook the other day, saying that it's not a big deal because it's just going into this fund that we have this big of anyway.
Isn't it?
$2 million per year they usually put in, and the fund itself is just, it's massive.
You sure it's $200 million?
That's what he posted on his Facebook page a couple of days ago, after the day after that budget thing came down.
It's an exorbitant amount of money.
Very large amounts. When you figure how many houses that could build for even a single family, that could get thousands and thousands of people either off the streets or into different better housing situations and things along those lines.
So being said that, are we going to start seeing what they've been seeing in Toronto, how Ford's been axing everything, with our unemployment rate going up and all that? Are we going to start seeing more and more of that here in London, do you guys think?
Totally. I mean, I just think all these things add up together. The EMD strike we're in, what we're talking about with Greece, all of this, city budgets. We're in this age of austerity they've been talking about. I mean, now it's coming down to it. They're going to start cutting the budgets of all these things that people care about, and people's lives will be impacted more and more. And that's why it'll be harder and harder to stay a liberal in the middle. You're going to have to, at some point, pick a side. I mean, it's totally a class conflict, and their lives will be impacted, and they'll make a choice more and more as time goes on. And yeah, I think it's going to be a big issue. It's going to be impossible to escape at some point. Like it's just going to be encroaching more and more on us as prices go up because of these effects, and people's jobs are affected, and it'll just be this vicious downward spiral, I think, just to add a pleasant note to the conversation. Doom and gloom.
Dum dum dum.
Yeah, but I think that is the realistic picture, at least from the trajectory of where things are going right now. If it keeps following, that's what's happening, and that's why things like Occupy and these movements around the world have been springing up, is because these conditions are taking shape and people's lives are starting to be impacted, and that's just going to get worse and worse and worse.
Can you tie all this into, like, all this austerity into globalization? Like, I mean, it seems like it's directly tied.
Well, yeah, in one way or another. What I also wanted to add in regards to the city council budget, like, look at the World Figure Skating Championships that they have coming up here soon. What did they spend? Something like $3 million on auxiliary things. Like, they wanted to put lights up, put new trees up, make their city look nice and pretty. Shove all the people that I guess are poor away from the downtown core.
Yeah, who's that for?
Yeah, it's not the average person that's benefiting off that. Like, I don't know anybody that's planning on attending that or even watching it on television, and they probably wouldn't pay any attention to it if it wasn't in the City of London in the first place. So to spend $3 million on that when you're cutting affordable housing and things along those lines, it is kind of very similar to certain austerity measures, because they seem to be cutting the money from the working class and boosting things that are directly geared to the upper class, to either just have Potemkin cities or things along those lines, where you have a facade of a city where everything looks marvelous, looks so great, just for the television cameras, but the reality of it is there's a near 10% unemployment rate that's going to be going up. There's very few rental units available in the city, and because of that, the rent prices are skyrocketing. So basically, money that could be going to help the average citizen isn't going there, and instead putting on a false image of the city for the world, when really they could be doing so much more with that money.
So we're all going to keep our eyes on what's going on in Europe. We have been for the last couple of years, all individually. I know that. I've talked with everybody about that. So it sort of seems like it's leading the way as to what's going to transpire here.
Do you see burning buildings here?
Not necessarily today, but at some point, definitely. It's like, I think of after the G20, when people were all in a hissy about the burning cruisers in Toronto. One of the responses I really liked was Peter Gelderloos wrote an article responding to how everyone was hysterical over that, and he ended it with, like, it's going to take a lot more than a couple burning cruisers to really have a revolution. Like, yeah, there's going to be some level of conflict. How deep it gets, who knows? I mean, all the way up to an open civil war. But at some point, there's going to be some kind of conflict that's inescapable, in my view. There's just no way it's not going to happen. These forces are colliding. Like I say, there's a trajectory right now, and unless something really changes, it's like the elites who own and control everything, the corporations that are the major institutions of our time. They're set on a certain path, and it's to our detriment. And people are just waking up to that and starting to resist. And so you have, like, the two major forces are colliding, in my view. I mean, that's it in a nutshell, and it's going to be everywhere. What's happening in Egypt and in Greece and Spain, that's like a foreshadowing of what's coming here at some point.
So are you trying to say that this is a middle-class war?
Well, to me, the middle class is an illusion, so I don't know if I would use those words. The middle class, whatever that is under massive attack, yes. I think the elites have changed the rules of the game. The unwritten rules were, you support us and we support you staying where you are. We'll let you have a degree of power and privilege, but you support us. And they've suddenly, or not so suddenly, I guess over time, have changed the rules of that game, and now the middle class are under massive attack. And yeah, you're going to see less and less decent, stable, jobs for people to come out of. And that's why university students, educated youth, are the mass of the uprisings in places like Egypt and Greece and Spain. Because they're the generation coming up who just have this really good view how messed up things are, and that they have almost no hope of ever living like their parents did. There's going to be no life like that for them.
You mentioned Greece, Egypt. These are countries that are already well off. What about countries like Africa? The Africans have been enslaved by corporations for, decades now. We didn't see an uprising from them, did we?
Egypt is Africa.
Yeah.
And
Tunisia.
Tunisia,
And
but I mean,
Nigeria,
I
the
would
big
say
general
as much
strike.
as I feel for them, the Africans, honestly, in the political, economic picture, they don't matter. They're going to have almost no impact on the way things are. We here in North America will have a massive impact. We're like the most important part of the movement there could be. It's the belly of the beast. This is things are directed from North America. So I just think everyone plays a role, but I just think really it's way more significant what happens in North America.
I think this is another privileged movement that will only benefit those that are leading it, and those that should be running it aren't part of it.
It could be. Now, there are places in Africa that have been rising up. Nigeria has risen up recently. They actually have an Occupy Nigeria, which is quite interesting, and they basically shut down a lot of the transportation of goods within the country for at least a weekend.
I seem to remember them going to the United Nations building recently, too, and doing a protest.
Oh, that's news to me. I didn't hear about that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, places in Africa are starting to pick up, and it's good to see, to be quite honest, because, yeah, like you said, the people in Africa have been under colonial rule for 150 to 200 years for many places, and it still goes on today under maybe neo-colonial type systems like the IMF and things along those lines, where the average person isn't seeing too much
the
net
NATO
benefit.
operation in Libya.
Yeah. Like the whole modernization theory has failed in Africa. Putting money in infrastructure has not helped the average person get a job, because when they're putting money in, they're putting in these big, massive mines or factories that basically are owned by people in North America that are being paid for by the people of the country, so they could have jobs which pay pennies on the dollar for a day.
Mm-hmm. And that's because of rules set up through the IMF and so forth, that you can't have any protectionism or anything like that in your country. And I love arguing with a lot of conservatives about that, because they seem to think that that's the way to go, that the total free enterprise system's the way to go, and they're so proud, and they seem to think that that's how, Canada was formed, and they neglect to remember that things like, Bell Canada, that because of Bell Canada, it helped finance the railway that connected this country. There, and it was protected. So for us to go into a third world nation and say, don't do as we did, do as we say, that's outrageous.
Oh yeah, and it's hypocrisy, totally. I mean, I don't know. In my view, those theories are complete fantasies. I'm not even sure if they really believe it themselves. I mean, because it's really obvious if you really take a look. Like, free markets do exist in the third world, and that's why they look like they do. All of our Western powerful countries were developed economically with protectionism. That's how they built up their massive industries like Bell and Bombardier and, any stable big industry. Chances are it was in some way backed up at some point by the government or through some kind of measures. And that's just the way it is. Every great power was built up that way. I mean, it's a complete fantasy to say otherwise.
Well, and two, if you don't allow any sense of protectionism whatsoever in some of these countries, how do the smaller businesses start? Like if I'm in a third world nation and I want to start my own business, how are you going to compete against KFC or Walmart or anything else that might be pulling into town?
Or these giant agribusinesses. That's what kills a lot of Africa, is they have to compete with our farming system over here, and then their own in their own domestic market, they get dominated by our corporations.
Yeah, and ours is subsidized a lot.
That die after 1 year and stuff. Like they're trapped into this system that's skewed against them, so they're doomed to lose from the beginning.
So modern day colonialism in the name of globalization?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, for sure, definitely. That's
I think
what it's all about.
I think we have a consensus on that.
Yeah, I mean, the world is going to globalize no matter what. I think there's a trend there, but that's different than what we call globalization was a corporate dream.
But the world's always been globalized.
Right, in the sense that we're all connected and We can cooperate between regions.
East Indian Trading Company, you can go way back.
Yeah, but that was colonial too.
yeah, but
that was massively.
Yeah, probably even more. Well, a different type, but.
Yeah, old style colonialism. The Americans moved on to a new form where it's like we don't have to actually take over the place. We just have to run everything there. If we own and control it, then it's ours. And that's how they treat Canada. They learned in 1812 not to come up here with guns no more, but they just own and control everything up here. So it's all good.
And it's not even just Africa where they're doing this too. They've done this for a long time in South and Central America.
For sure.
Ecuador, for example, their president was... There's conspiracy theories out there that the president was assassinated in a plane crash because he told, I believe it was Jimmy Carter, that it was nice the Panama Canal was opening, but he was going to take the money and put it towards to helping the poor people of his country out, and within months he was gone.
Yeah.
And like John Perkins, if anybody's ever heard of him, it's great to do some reading on him.
Economic hitman.
Yep, he worked in Ecuador, worked in Colombia, worked all throughout Central America, enforcing U.S. policies and telling these guys that if you don't accept our policies, we're going to make sure you get run out of power. We're going to do whatever it takes, and those policies were opening your borders to American companies or multinational companies to go in and set up businesses there where they had previously had nationalized components to their government.
And accept big loans in doing that process. Like, this is all part of the plan, which I guess we should just say, if people haven't seen it, they should, or read the book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and then the sequel was Secret History of America or something. I'd have to look that up. But really good stuff. He just lays out, like Brent says, that his job was sort of to be the policeman behind the American policy, the unspoken American policy of pushing their corporate interests into different places around the world. So that he would come in, say some guy gets elected in some Central American country, and he's bound and determined to help his people, or a Middle Eastern country or wherever, and he doesn't want American influence in there, and he's going to combat it, and he really means it, and he's an honest politician, and he's not lying, he's for his people, he's really popular. He gets in there, he's going to get a visit from someone like Perkins, and they're going to say, "That's all good, man, I really admire you, but here's a basket full of money, more money than you ever dreamed of in your life, or here's a villa in Europe and a whole harem full of women with it, or whatever." And if that doesn't get him, they try and get something on him, to discredit him. And if that doesn't work, they try and turn people against him within his own groups and in his own country. And if that doesn't work, then they'll send someone out to execute him, to assassinate him. And finally, if that doesn't work, because that's what happened with Saddam Hussein, they tried all that shit and they couldn't get Saddam out. His own guards were so tight, they couldn't even arrange a proper assassination because he was too well aware of their tactics. The final one is they'll invade you. And that's what they did with Panama. That's what they did with Iraq. They tried all that shit, and when it doesn't work and they really still want you out, then they send in the Marines. But that's why even honest politicians with a good platform aren't the answer, because in the end, power will still take them out.
We're tied into international arrangements and agreements through the G20 and so forth that it doesn't matter who gets elected.
It's getting to the point it doesn't even matter right at that point.
No, you can't you step out of these arrangements. How do you do that? That's
revolution.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the tough part, right? And I've talked to some politicians about that too. I mean, some are great people and they're all very well-meaning, but I mean, you're just a career politician and you're not actually going to be able to do anything other than show you care, because you can't change anything.
This is part of the context of viewing what's happening around the world, I think. People are just becoming aware that the system is geared against us, that none of this really does matter. It's being worked against us. And like in Spain and Greece and that, they realize it doesn't matter who you elect. Those are socialist governments in some of those cases turning against their own people, it's all messed up. There's no other way out than to fight back.
Am I sensing that voting isn't the answer then?
I am not advocating voting.
What's your solution, Anthony?
Well, I think what we're doing.
What are we doing?
Well, the movement that we're watching, the one that we've talked about, that just expresses resistance, but not through the political institutions. We're not voting for the opposition. We're not, putting faith in some representative. We're using direct action. We're using civil disobedience and promoting our own participatory democracy as a substitute for the system that exists.
So are we building a parallel system to the one that exists right now? It seems that it's not really... We haven't gotten to the point of Greece yet, or Spain, or Portugal, or Italy. Not to say that we won't get there in a sudden fashion, but at this point right now, are we just starting to build a parallel system?
I think that's part of what's happening, yeah. I see it as sort of a great awakening because North America has been so far behind Europe and the other parts of the world in being really up to date, except for a really tiny group of people. Most folks really are too busy watching TV and listening to much music or whatever than to actually be engaged with what's going on. But now that they are and they're having examples set out, it's becoming a more real situation.
I'd say if you ask the average person what the IMF means, they couldn't tell you. They think it might be a new television channel or something along those lines.
But I bet the numbers of them that could answer are higher now than they were like 2 years ago.
Oh, definitely.
But I also blame the education system, too. That doesn't cover the IMF. And, only the benefits are looked at, and only briefly, right? There's a lot that we're taught that is not true.
Kind of ties back into something I think me and Anthony were talking about a little while ago, and that's propaganda and mass media.
Well, I just think people in general vastly underestimate the propaganda system that we're in, that it's so sophisticated and permeates us from every angle so much. We're just immersed in it, so we don't recognize it for what it is. And that would include mass media and the education system. And that is at least part of the difference between North America and the rest of the world. Or the Western Europe, I guess, could be partially included in that. But just that the views in America are so different than the rest of the world. Why? Because they're immersed in this media and education system that just leads us off in this weird path. So yeah, I think that's really underestimated by most people.
Homeschooling? Are you suggesting that?
I think it'd be worth looking into if you have kids that you care about.
But at the same time, you also have to worry because there's a lot of studies, especially in the southern states, where a lot of kids are homeschooled. They basically turn into religious fanatics down there. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of scary at times when the education level of some of these people gets further on, some of the beliefs they have. Rick Santorum is one that was homeschooled when he was growing up, and to say extreme is the least you could say about his views.
Yeah, but, the schooling that we all get, we all know how worthless some aspects of it is. That kind of ties into the propaganda machine and, gets everybody to do their punch cards when the bells ring and sit in conformity and, be good little worker bees prepping up for that. So